In today's video, I am going to build the 10 tallest buildings in the world. And to do this, I need to build some of the most difficult, complex, and tedious skyscrapers I've ever done. But before we get to those, I have to build the CITIC Tower located in Beijing, China. I started building the CITIC Tower with the outline and then filling in the glass and adding some details. Once that was done, I built the core of the building and filled in the floors. The roof of this skyscraper was also pretty simple, but it's different from most skyscrapers, which made it fun to build. This building also has an interesting ground floor, which was the last part that I made. After building the CITIC Tower quite easily in only 3.5 hours, I was feeling very confident. But the next skyscraper would prove to be my first big challenge in this video. The Tianjin CTF Finance Center, located in Tianjin, China, is actually tied with the next building on this list at 530 blocks tall. The difficulty with this building comes from the curves and overall organic shape of this building, and especially the roof. I started by eyeballing the outline and making slight adjustments as necessary. I made an attempt at the roof before filling in the rest of the glass, but I knew I'd have to majorly adjust it later. Building the glass was fairly easy, but I had to eyeball it and make slight adjustments as well. Due to the organic nature of this build, it was more challenging to measure distances and proportions. However, once I had the outline done and began to fill in the glass, it came together quite quickly. Once the core and floors were added in, I spent the rest of the day fixing the top of the skyscraper, finally settling on a design I was happy with. I was happy with how this build turned out, and with my ability to actually make it, but I couldn't celebrate yet as the looming threat of the most difficult build on this list, and the most difficult build I've ever made, was at the back of my mind. Luckily for me, the next couple of buildings would be pretty easy, starting with the next tallest building in the world, the Guangzhou CTF Finance Center. This building is also 530 blocks tall, tying with the previous building at the 8th tallest in the world. This skyscraper is mostly square except for some curves, but overall much easier to build than the last one. Once the outline was done, I filled in the glass, built the core and columns of the building, and added in the floors. It was just a bit tedious working around the outline, but it wasn't that bad. After filling in the outline, I just had to add the terraces as well as the main roof of the skyscraper. Just like after the CITIC Tower, I was feeling better and more confident than ever. And the next skyscraper would be one I was already very familiar with. One World Trade Center is the 7th tallest building in the world. After just building it in my last video, having to build it one more time was a breeze. I started by building the base and outline of the skyscraper, and then I filled in the rest of the glass. Comparing this to my first attempt at this skyscraper, I've definitely improved a lot. I finished off this build by making the spire, which brings this building's height to 541 meters. The 6th tallest building in the world is the Lotte World Tower, located in Seoul, South Korea. The outline was pretty easy to build, but when I tried to manually place the glass, I realized it wasn't looking great. I ended up using Axiom to get the shape of the glass using the modeling tool. Once I added the core, I thought I had messed up because of how weird it looked, but after adding the floors, I realized it was fine. The real icing on the cake for this build was the white glass panes that went up the height of the building. With those, it looks much more like realistic window panes without being too intrusive. This build overall was pretty difficult, requiring different techniques than what I normally use, which helped prepare me for what's to come. Luckily, the next build, the Ping An Finance Center, was a fairly simple build. Like always, I started by making the outline, then filling in the walls and glass. I actually really liked this skyscraper, especially because I was able to use a different color of glass than normal. Because this build is symmetrical, all I had to do was make 1/4 of the build, then copy and rotate it. This build looks a lot more difficult than it actually is, and the symmetry is the main reason that it only took me 2 hours to finish. The next skyscraper, and please forgive me if I've pronounced this horribly, the Makkah Royal Clock Tower, or Burj Khalifa Towers, is located in Mecca, Saudi Arabia. This was one of the 2 buildings that I was dreading having to make, and this is because it's an absolutely massive skyscraper, not only in height but also with the surrounding buildings. I started by building the clock tower itself, knowing that if I'm able to build this successfully, the rest of the build won't be as bad. Once the top part was done, I extended the tower down to meet the rest of the buildings. I used a 3D model I found online to eyeball the dimensions of the smaller buildings as well as any photos I could find online. I settled on a block palette and designed the windows as stripped oak before texturing, light blue stained glass, oak trapdoors, and a few other blocks. Building the main entrance was pretty easy, and with the tower mostly done, I worked on finishing the spire. It has this pretty sick blue colored crystal ball type structure on top, and it extends upwards into a crescent. After finishing the main spire, I added some minor details and texturing to finish off this build. Now, it was time to build the most difficult and complex skyscraper of the entire video. This is Shanghai Tower. Not only is this build asymmetrical, it features pretty much only organic shapes and curves. My strategy for this build was to get the base built and use any diagrams I could find online to start to attempt an outline. Now, unlike most skyscraper builds, this one I really had to eyeball at different levels, and I started by building each mechanical level. This would be an immense help to make sure I was filling in the floors correctly. For each floor, I used slabs on the inside of the glass every few blocks, and I built these layers instead of just going straight for all the glass at once. Instead of eyeballing a huge distance, I slowly decreased how much glass I'd have to fill in without any guidelines. It was at this point that this so-called impossible skyscraper began to feel very possible. After filling in the glass, I built the roof, and with the general shape already done, it was pretty easy to finish off the rest of this build. The current second tallest building in the world is Merdeka 118, and it was next up on my list. I've already built this skyscraper before, so I wasn't worried at all. Especially after the Shanghai Tower, I knew this wouldn't be a problem. I used blue concrete for the outline and filled in the glass one section at a time. This is an example of a build that looks extremely complicated at first, but the sharp angles and symmetry differentiate it from the previous skyscraper, making it a bit tedious but overall a lot easier to build. The final skyscraper in this video is the Burj Khalifa. This build is 828 blocks tall, and luckily it's also a build that I've made before. Because I've built this building twice already, I was able to breeze through the entire build because I was able to use my previous attempts as references. As I finished my final build of this project, I looked back extremely happy with the builds, but I was even more excited for what's to come next.